The radar contact appeared at 3:47 hours, 37,000 feet above the Nevada desert, moving at subsonic speed in a holding pattern that made no sense. Air traffic control at Nelly's had been tracking it for 14 minutes, watching as the unidentified aircraft circled the same coordinates with mathematical precision, neither responding to radio calls nor deviating from its mysterious flight path. Ghost 77, this is Nelly's control. You are in restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately. Static filled the channel. The aircraft continued its lazy orbit, a ghost in the desert sky that shouldn't exist. In the pre-dawn darkness of the operations center, Senior Controller Marcus Delano stared at the green blip on his scope, his coffee growing cold in the ceramic mug stamped with the base logo. 23 years of managing airspace had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct screamed that something was wrong. The aircraft's signature was clean, too clean for civilian traffic, but it wasn't broadcasting military identification codes either. "Sir, should I scramble the alert fighters?" asked Airman Rodriguez, her fingers hovering over the red phone that connected directly to the 65th Aggressor Squadron. Delano hesitated. Protocol dictated immediate interception of unidentified aircraft in restricted airspace, but something about the contact's behavior patterns felt deliberate, almost like a signal. The precise timing of its appearance, the calculated altitude, the methodical circles, it reminded him of something from his early career, back when certain operations didn't officially exist. The aircraft suddenly banked left, a subtle wing dip that lasted exactly 3 seconds before returning to its circular pattern. Delano's breath caught in his throat. That wasn't random turbulence or a navigation adjustment. That was a recognition signal, one he hadn't seen in over 2 decades. "Rodriguez, get me Colonel Harrison on the secure line. Tell him we might have a Unit 17 situation." The airman's eyes widened. Unit 17 was legend, whispered about in the darker corners of military aviation. Most people assumed it was just another conspiracy theory, like Area 51's supposed alien technology. But Delano had been around long enough to know that some legends were built on classified truths. As Rodriguez reached for the secure phone, the unidentified aircraft performed another wing dip, this one lasting exactly 5 seconds. The pattern was unmistakable now. 3 seconds, pause, 5 seconds. It was the old recognition code, the one that officially never existed, transmitted by someone who shouldn't know it. The desert wind howled across the tarmac outside, carrying with it the promise of answers that might be better left buried in the classified archives of America's shadow wars. 2 F-22 Raptors lifted off from runway 3 at 3:52 hours, their twin Pratt & Whitney engines carving twin trails of superheated exhaust across the star-filled Nevada sky. Major Blake "Viper" Morrison led the two-ship formation, his wingman Lieutenant Colonel Jessica "Phoenix" Kane maintaining perfect tactical spacing as they climbed toward the intercept coordinates. Raptor 11, contact is bearing 090, Angels 37, approximately 40 miles southeast of your position, crackled the voice of Nelly's control through their encrypted communication system. Be advised, contact is non-responsive to radio calls and exhibiting unusual flight patterns. Morrison adjusted his grip on the stick, feeling the familiar weight of combat responsibility settle across his shoulders like an old flight suit. At 42, he'd logged over 3,000 hours in various fighters, from early F-16 sorties over Iraq to classified missions that would never appear in his official service record. But there was something about this intercept that felt different, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn thunderstorms building on the western horizon. "Phoenix, you picking up anything unusual on your sensors?" he asked over the internal flight frequency. Kane's voice came back steady, professional. "Negative, Viper. Clean radar return, no electronic emissions, no heat bloom indicating afterburner use. Whoever's flying that bird knows how to stay invisible. The irony wasn't lost on Morrison. Jessica Kane had been invisible herself for most of her career, overlooked for prime assignments despite skills that surpassed half the hotshots in the squadron. Command had a way of seeing what it wanted to see, and what it typically wanted to see were pilots who looked like the ones in the recruitment posters. Kane didn't fit that profile, but she could fly circles around most of the golden boys who did. Their radar warning receivers remained silent as they closed the distance, indicating the unknown aircraft wasn't actively scanning them with targeting radar. Either their visitor was supremely confident or supremely foolish. Morrison hoped it was the former. The alternatives were considerably more dangerous. "Tally contact, 2 o'clock low," Kane reported, her voice betraying the slightest hint of surprise. "Viper, that's not showing up on any aircraft recognition profiles I know." Morrison followed her vector and felt his own moment of disorientation. The aircraft below them was sleek, angular in ways that suggested stealth characteristics, but its configuration didn't match any known fighter in the American inventory. More troubling, it flew with the kind of precision that spoke of an exceptional pilot at the controls. The mystery deepened with every passing second, like storm clouds gathering on a horizon that had been clear just moments before. The unknown aircraft maintained its perfect circular orbit, as the two F-22s established a combat air patrol pattern 3 miles away, close enough to observe but far enough to react if the situation turned hostile. Morrison studied the sleek profile through his helmet-mounted display, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he knew about military aviation. Nellie's control, Raptor 11 has visual contact with unknown aircraft. Configuration appears to be a single-seat fighter, unknown manufacture, exhibiting advanced stealth characteristics. Morrison's voice carried the measured tone of a professional pilot reporting facts, but internally he was wrestling with questions that had no comfortable answers. The aircraft was beautiful in the way that only purpose-built machines could be, every line and surface optimized for cutting through air with minimal resistance. Its dark coating seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making it difficult to track even in the growing dawn. More unsettling was the way it flew, not like a test pilot putting a new airframe through its paces, but like someone intimately familiar with the aircraft's capabilities. "Unknown aircraft. This is United States Air Force Raptor 11, Morrison transmitted on the international emergency frequency. "You are in violation of restricted airspace. Identify yourself and state your intentions." Silence stretched across the radio spectrum like a held breath. The mystery pilot continued the circular pattern with mechanical precision, neither acknowledging the F-22s nor showing any sign of concern about their presence. It was the kind of calculated disregard that suggested either supreme confidence or a very specific agenda. Kane's voice cut through Morrison's analysis. "Viper, check your 3 o'clock. The way that aircraft just rolled out of its turn, I've seen that technique before." Morrison focused on the unknown fighter as it completed another circuit. There was something familiar about its flight characteristics, a signature in the way it moved through the air that tickled the edges of his memory. The roll was perfectly executed, maintaining altitude and airspeed with the kind of precision that took years to develop. "Phoenix, talk to me. Where have you seen that before?" A pause stretched between them, filled with the quiet hum of engines and electronics. When Kane spoke again, her voice carried a note of uncertainty that Morrison had rarely heard from her. "I'm not sure. Maybe nowhere. Maybe somewhere I'm not supposed to remember." The cryptic response sent a chill down Morrison's spine. In their line of work, there were programs and operations that existed in the gray spaces between acknowledgement and denial, missions that left pilots with memories they couldn't officially discuss and skills they couldn't officially explain. Below them, the unknown aircraft performed another subtle wing dip, 3 seconds, Pause, 5 seconds, and Morrison felt the first pieces of a very dangerous puzzle clicking into place. Colonel Sarah Harrison's boots echoed through the empty corridors of the Tactical Operations Center as she made her way to the secure communication facility, her mind racing through classified databases that most people didn't know existed. The call from Delano had pulled her from a deep sleep, but 28 years in Air Force intelligence had trained her to wake up thinking clearly. Unit 17 hadn't been mentioned in official channels for over 2 decades, not since the program had been buried under layers of classification, so deep that even acknowledging its existence required special authorization. But Harrison remembered the briefings, the carefully worded reports that described capabilities and operations that pushed the boundaries of what was technically possible. The secure terminal required 2 different authentication methods before granting access to the classified files Harrison needed. As the system processed her credentials, she found herself thinking about the pilots who had volunteered for Unit 17, the ones who had disappeared into compartmentalized programs and emerged months later with skills that couldn't be fully explained in unclassified settings. Most of those pilots were dead now, victims of the inherent dangers in testing experimental aircraft and tactics that existed at the bleeding edge of military aviation. The few survivors had been scattered to different assignments, their specialized knowledge too valuable to concentrate in one location and too dangerous to leave completely unused. The terminal chimed softly as classified files began populating her screen. Aircraft designations that had never appeared in public documentation, pilot records that had been sanitized of their most interesting details, and operational reports that read like science fiction despite being stamped with the highest levels of security classification. One name stood out from the personnel files, accompanied by a photograph that showed a young woman in flight gear standing beside an aircraft that had been digitally obscured. Captain Zara, ghostwriter, Petrov, test pilot extraordinaire, holder of multiple classified altitude and speed records, and one of only 3 pilots certified to fly the experimental aircraft designated X-47 Shadowhawk. Harrison cross-referenced the dates in Petrov's file with the current situation developing over the Nevada desert. The timeline was troubling. According to official records, Captain Petrov had died in a training accident 7 years ago, her experimental aircraft suffering a catastrophic systems failure during a classified test flight. Her body had never been recovered from the crash site, which was itself classified at a level that made asking questions about it a career-ending mistake. But Harrison had learned to read between the lines of military documents, to see the careful language that suggested alternative explanations. Sometimes training accidents weren't accidents, and sometimes pilots who officially died were simply transferred to programs so classified that their continued existence became a state secret. The implications were staggering and potentially catastrophic for national security. Morrison keyed his radio with growing unease as the tactical situation developed in ways that defied standard interception procedures. Nellie's control, Raptor 11 requesting updated instructions. Unknown aircraft continues to ignore radio calls and maintains circular orbit in restricted airspace. The response came back loaded with tension that even the encrypted communication system couldn't mask. Raptor 11, maintain visual contact, but do not take any aggressive action without specific authorization from higher command. We have senior leadership en route to evaluate the situation. The unusual instructions raised red flags throughout Morrison's tactical awareness. In normal circumstances, an unidentified aircraft in restricted airspace would be ordered to follow the intercepting fighters to a designated landing field, with escalating measures authorized if the pilot refused to comply. The fact that they were being told to maintain a passive posture suggested someone in the chain of command recognized something about their current situation. Kane's voice cut through his analysis with professional calm. Viper, Unknown aircraft is changing altitude, descending through flight level 350, maintaining circular pattern. Morrison adjusted his own altitude to maintain visual contact, watching as the sleek fighter dropped toward a lower flight level with the kind of precision that spoke of exceptional pilot skills. The descent was smooth, controlled, executed without any of the aggressive maneuvering that might indicate hostile intent. Contact is leveling at flight level 300, Kane reported. Still maintaining circular orbit, still non-responsive to radio calls. The new altitude put the unknown aircraft in a better position for detailed observation, and Morrison found himself studying every detail of its construction through his helmet-mounted display. The airframe was unlike anything in the current Air Force inventory, incorporating design elements that suggested technology advances beyond current publicly acknowledged capabilities. More troubling was the growing certainty that whoever was flying the aircraft possessed skills that matched or exceeded those of the elite pilots in his own squadron. The precision flying, the perfect positioning, the calculated disregard for standard interception protocols. It all pointed to someone with extensive military training and experience with classified operations. Phoenix, what's your assessment of pilot capability based on observed flight characteristics? Morrison asked, seeking his wingman's professional opinion. Kane's response came after a long pause. Viper, whoever's flying that bird has skills that are off the charts. The kind of precision I'm seeing takes years to develop, and the aircraft handling suggests familiarity with advanced flight systems that aren't exactly common knowledge. The unspoken implication hung between them like a loaded weapon. They weren't just dealing with an unidentified aircraft. They were dealing with a ghost from the classified world of experimental military aviation. The X-47 Shadowhawk banked left in another perfect circle, its pilot maintaining the mysterious orbital pattern, while two of America's most advanced fighters watched from a respectful distance. Inside the cockpit, Captain Zara Petrov allowed herself a thin smile as she monitored the radio chatter between the intercepting F-22s and ground control. 7 years of officially not existing had taught her patience, but today's mission was testing even her considerable reserves of that virtue. The recognition signals were being transmitted exactly as planned. The flight characteristics were being demonstrated for the benefit of anyone with the knowledge to interpret them properly, and the careful positioning was designed to trigger memories in the right people without alerting those who lacked the appropriate clearances. The heads-up display in her helmet showed the two Raptors maintaining their observation pattern, their pilots undoubtedly trying to reconcile what they were seeing with their knowledge of current military aviation capabilities. Petrov knew both pilots by reputation, if not personally. Morrison had been a rising star in the fighter community when she disappeared into the classified world, and Kane had been building a reputation as one of the most skilled pilots in the service despite being consistently overlooked for high-profile assignments. Shadow Control, Ghost Rider is in position and maintaining demonstration pattern, she transmitted on a frequency that didn't officially exist. Intercept aircraft are maintaining respectful distance. Ground control appears to be following appropriate protocols for Unit 17 situations. The response came back through encrypted burst transmission. A brief acknowledgement that confirmed her mission parameters remained unchanged. Phase 1 of the operation was proceeding according to plan, which meant it was time to begin implementing the more dangerous elements of her return to the world of acknowledged military aviation. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. For 7 years, she'd been flying missions that never happened, piloting aircraft that didn't exist, and conducting operations that would be denied by every level of government if they were ever exposed to public scrutiny. But the world was changing, and some of the capabilities that had been developed in the shadows were becoming too valuable to keep hidden. Petrov checked her fuel status and mission timeline, Then began the subtle altitude changes that would signal the next phase of her demonstration. The people watching from the ground needed to understand what they were dealing with, and the pilots in the air needed to see capabilities that would prepare them for what was coming next. The desert wind carried her aircraft through another perfect circle, a ghost returning from the classified margins of military aviation to deliver a message that would reshape everything the Air Force thought it knew about the possible. Colonel Harrison burst through the doors of the Tactical Operations Center with classified files clutched against her chest, and an expression that made Senior Controller Delano immediately regret making the phone call that had started this entire situation. Behind her followed two men in suits who carried themselves with the careful neutrality of intelligence officials, trying not to appear threatening, while simultaneously making it clear that they were very dangerous people. "Colonel, we've got the unknown aircraft maintaining its circular pattern at 30,000 feet, with two F-22s providing observation," Delano reported, gesturing toward the radar display that showed three distinct contacts in perfect formation. "The bird's been up there for almost an hour now, completely non-responsive to radio calls but showing no hostile intent." Harrison studied the radar contacts while her mind processed the implications of what the classified files had revealed. If her suspicions were correct, they weren't dealing with a security breach or foreign incursion. They were dealing with the return of someone who had been officially dead for 7 years, but who might hold the key to capabilities that could reshape American military aviation. "Have either of the intercept pilots reported anything unusual about the aircraft's flight characteristics?" she asked, already knowing that the answer would confirm her worst fears and best hopes simultaneously. "Both pilots have commented on exceptional precision and advanced aircraft capabilities," Delano replied. "Major Morrison specifically noted that the configuration doesn't match any known aircraft in our inventory, and Lieutenant Colonel Kane observed flight techniques that she described as familiar but couldn't specifically identify." The mention of Kane's name sent a jolt of recognition through Harrison's memory. Jessica Kane had been one of the pilots considered for Unit 17 before the program had been shuttered, someone whose skills had been impressive enough to warrant evaluation for the most classified aviation programs in the Air Force. If Kane was recognizing flight techniques, it meant the demonstration above them was being conducted by someone with knowledge of classified training methods. One of the suited men stepped forward, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone accustomed to delivering uncomfortable truths. "Colonel Harrison, we need to establish positive identification of the pilot before this situation develops any further. If our preliminary assessment is correct, we're looking at a security situation that extends far beyond unauthorized airspace incursion." Harrison nodded grimly, understanding the full implications of what wasn't being said directly. Unit 17 had been classified not just because of the advanced technology it had developed, but because of the unconventional methods it had used to recruit and train its pilots. Some of those methods had involved creating cover stories that allowed exceptional pilots to disappear from conventional military assignments and emerge in highly classified programs with new identities and capabilities that couldn't be explained through normal channels. "Get me a direct communication link to the intercept aircraft," she ordered. "It's time to ask some questions that aren't going to have comfortable answers." Kane's voice carried a note of controlled tension as she reported the unknown aircraft's latest maneuver to both her flight leader and ground control. "Viper, contact is beginning a descent to flight level 250, maintaining circular pattern but demonstrating exceptional rate of descent control." Morrison acknowledged the report while studying the sleek fighter through his helmet display, trying to identify specific details that might provide clues about its origin and capabilities. The aircraft's performance characteristics were beyond anything he'd encountered in his extensive career, suggesting technological advances that weren't supposed to exist in operational form. "Raptor 11, This is Colonel Harrison at Nellie's control. A new voice cut through their tactical frequency. I need you to attempt direct communication with the unknown aircraft using the following frequency. She provided a series of numbers that didn't correspond to any standard aviation communication channel. Morrison exchanged glances with his wingman, though she was too far away to see his expression. The frequency Harrison had provided was outside normal parameters, suggesting they were being asked to communicate through channels that existed in the classified margins of military operations. Roger, Nellie's control. Raptor 11 switching to specified frequency. Morrison adjusted his radio settings and took a deep breath before transmitting. Unknown aircraft. This is United States Air Force Raptor 11 on emergency frequency. Identify yourself and state your intentions. For several seconds, static filled the channel. Then a voice came through the speakers, clear and professional, with an accent that carried hints of Eastern European origins and training that was unmistakably American military. Raptor 11, this is Ghostwriter. I believe you're looking for someone who doesn't officially exist. The call sign hit Morrison like a physical blow. Ghostwriter had been legend in the fighter community, whispered about in the informal networks that connected elite pilots across different assignments and classifications. Stories of impossible flight demonstrations, classified speed and altitude records, and capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what was technically achievable with current technology. Kane's voice came through their internal frequency with barely controlled excitement. Viper, I know that call sign. Ghostwriter was Unit 17's primary test pilot before the program was terminated. Morrison felt pieces of a complex puzzle beginning to align in ways that were both fascinating and terrifying. Unit 17 had been the Air Force's most classified aviation development program, working on capabilities that were supposedly years ahead of anything in operational service. If Ghostwriter was real, and if she was flying over Nevada in an aircraft that matched the advanced specifications that had been rumored to exist in classified development programs, then everything they thought they knew about current military aviation capabilities was about to be challenged. Ghostwriter, this is Raptor 11. We need you to proceed to designated landing coordinates and submit to standard security protocols. The response came back with a hint of dark humor. Raptor 11, I'm afraid my current situation is considerably more complicated than standard security protocols are designed to handle. Harrison's hands moved across the secure communication console with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades managing classified operations that existed in the gray spaces between official acknowledgement and plausible denial. The voice identification software had already confirmed what her analysis of the classified files had suggested. They were dealing with Captain Zara Petrov, officially deceased test pilot and holder of multiple records that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Ghostwriter, this is Colonel Harrison at Nellie's control, she transmitted on the classified frequency. We need to discuss your current operational status and the implications of your return to acknowledged airspace. The response came back immediately, professional but loaded with implications that made Harrison's skin crawl. Shadow Control, Ghostwriter is operating under Emergency Authorization Tango 77, conducting Phase 1 demonstration as outlined in classified operational parameters. Request guidance for transition to Phase 2 activities. Harrison felt the blood drain from her face. Emergency Authorization Tango 77 was a protocol that hadn't been activated since the darkest days of the Cold War, a classification level that allowed certain assets to operate independently when normal command structures were compromised or inadequate for dealing with emerging threats. If Petrov was claiming authorization under Tango 77, it meant she believed the United States was facing a situation that required capabilities from the deepest levels of classified military development. One of the intelligence officials stepped closer to Harrison's workstation, his voice barely above a whisper. "Colonel, we need to understand exactly what Phase 2 activities entail before we authorize any transition. If Captain Petrov has been operating in deep classification for 7 years, her definition of appropriate response might be considerably more aggressive than current policy allows." Harrison nodded grimly, understanding that they were balanced on the edge of a situation that could either provide unprecedented advantages to American military capabilities or create an intelligence disaster that would take decades to contain. The fact that Petrov had chosen to reveal herself suggested she believed the potential benefits outweighed the enormous risks involved in exposing Unit 17's continued existence. "Ghost Rider, what is the nature of the threat that justifies emergency authorization Tango 77?" Harrison transmitted, already dreading the answer. The response came back after a pause that suggested careful consideration of operational security requirements. "Shadow Control recommends secure facility briefing for detailed threat assessment. Current communications channel insufficient for complete situation analysis." The diplomatic phrasing couldn't mask the underlying message. Petrov had information that was too sensitive to discuss over radio communications, even on the most classified frequencies available. Whatever had driven her to break cover and reveal Unit 17's continued existence was significant enough to justify risking exposure of one of the Air Force's most secret programs. Morrison found himself in the surreal position of escorting a ghost through Nevada airspace while trying to process revelations that challenged everything he thought he knew about military aviation. The sleek fighter ahead of him was no longer just an unidentified aircraft. It was proof that the Air Force possessed capabilities that existed far beyond anything in public knowledge. "Ghost Rider, Raptor 11 requesting clarification on your aircraft specifications," he transmitted, his professional curiosity overriding his growing unease about the situation's implications. "Your performance characteristics appear to exceed known parameters for operational fighters." The response carried a note of dry humor that somehow made the impossible situation feel more real. "Raptor 11, my current ride incorporates technology advances that are approximately 7 years ahead of your most optimistic projections for future aircraft development. Think of it as a preview of coming attractions." Kane's voice cut through their exchange with tactical awareness. "Both aircraft, we have 2 additional contacts approaching from the southwest, fast movers, climbing through flight level 400. Morrison's radar warning receiver remained silent, indicating the approaching aircraft weren't actively targeting them, but their high altitude and approach vector suggested they were military fighters responding to the developing situation. The complexity of the airspace management problem was growing exponentially as more assets became involved in what had started as a simple interception mission. "Nellie's Control, Raptor 11 has radar contact on 2 additional aircraft approaching our area of operations. Request identification and intentions." Harrison's voice came back loaded with tension. "Raptor 11, additional aircraft are friendly assets responding to develop the situation. Maintain current formation and prepare to escort all aircraft to designated secure landing facility." The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the fact that they were being directed to a facility that probably didn't appear on any public maps, where debriefings would be conducted by people whose job titles couldn't be mentioned in unclassified settings. Morrison had always known such places existed, but he'd never expected to actually visit one. "Ghost Rider, what should we expect when we get wherever we're going?" Morrison asked, hopping for reassurance that he wasn't about to disappear into the same classified margins that had apparently consumed Petrov 7 years earlier. "Raptor 11, expect to learn that everything you thought you knew about current military capabilities was just the tip of a very large and very classified iceberg," came the response. Also expect that your life is about to become considerably more complicated. The two additional contacts resolved into F-35 Lightning IIs configured for electronic warfare. Their approach perfectly coordinated to establish a secure corridor around the formation of three aircraft that were about to land at a facility that officially didn't exist. Morrison watched them take positions that would prevent unauthorized observation of the developing situation, while providing tactical support if the circumstances required more aggressive measures. As the enlarged formation began its descent toward coordinates that weren't marked on any standard aviation chart, Morrison reflected on the irony that his routine intercept mission had evolved into an escort flight for one of the Air Force's most closely guarded secrets. The morning sun was painting the Nevada desert in shades of gold and red, creating a beautiful backdrop for revelations that would reshape his understanding of American military power. "Ghost Rider, one question before we land," Morrison transmitted as the desert airstrip came into view. "How long have you been flying aircraft that aren't supposed to exist?" The response came back with a mixture of pride and melancholy that spoke to years of extraordinary achievement conducted in the shadows of official denial. Raptor 11, I've been pushing the boundaries of the possible since before your current aircraft were even on the drawing board. The question you should be asking is what threats required those capabilities to be developed in secret. Morrison absorbed that uncomfortable implication as the runway grew larger in his field of vision, understanding that he was about to receive answers to questions he'd never thought to ask about the hidden dimensions of American military aviation. The classified airfield appeared out of the Nevada desert like a mirage, its existence camouflaged by natural terrain features and electronic countermeasures that would fool all but the most sophisticated surveillance systems. Morrison had flown over this area dozens of times during training missions, without ever suspecting that a fully operational airbase lay hidden beneath careful landscaping and advanced stealth technology. Ground control guided them through an approach pattern that avoided standard aviation routes, directing the formation toward a runway that was longer and more heavily reinforced than most public airports. As they descended through the dry desert air, Morrison could see aircraft shelters and support facilities that suggested this installation supported operations considerably more complex than simple test flights. "All aircraft, tower control is assuming guidance for landing sequence," came a new voice through their radios, professional but carrying undertones that suggested the people managing this facility were accustomed to handling situations that existed outside normal military protocols. "Ghost Rider is cleared for runway 01. Raptor flight will follow at standard intervals." Petrov's voice came back immediately, crisp and efficient. "Tower control, Ghost Rider is established on final approach, requesting hot refuel and technical inspection upon landing. Aircraft has been operational for extended duration and requires full systems evaluation." The exchange revealed that Petrov had been flying for considerably longer than the hour they'd been tracking her over Nevada, raising questions about where she'd originated her flight and what other activities she'd been conducting before revealing herself to conventional military forces. Morrison filed those questions away for the debriefing that would inevitably follow their landing. The X-47 Shadowhawk touched down with the kind of precision that spoke to exceptional pilot skill and advanced aircraft systems, its landing so smooth it appeared to float onto the runway despite the high-performance approach speed required by its aerodynamic configuration. Morrison followed at the prescribed interval, noting that ground crews were already moving toward Petrov's aircraft with equipment and procedures that suggested they were familiar with its requirements. Kane landed third in the sequence, her F-22 performing flawlessly despite the unusual circumstances of their arrival at a facility that wasn't supposed to exist. As Morrison taxied clear of the runway, he could see security personnel taking positions around the aircraft parking area, their weapons and equipment indicating they were prepared for considerably more than routine aircraft security. All pilots remain with your aircraft pending arrival of debrief personnel, Tower Control instructed. Ground crews will handle immediate aircraft requirements, but pilots are not authorized to leave the flight line without specific escort. Morrison shut down his engines and began the post-flight checklist, his hands moving through familiar procedures, while his mind tried to process the implications of everything he'd witnessed during the past 2 hours. The routine interception mission had evolved into something that would require classifications he'd never encountered, involving capabilities that challenged his fundamental understanding of current military aviation. Through his canopy, he could see Petrov climbing down from her aircraft, her movements showing the careful precision of someone who had spent years flying experimental aircraft in dangerous conditions. Captain Zara Petrov removed her helmet and shook out dark hair that carried streaks of premature gray, the visual evidence of 7 years spent flying aircraft that pushed both technology and human endurance to their absolute limits. Her flight suit bore no visible unit patches or rank insignia, the deliberate anonymity of someone whose official existence had been carefully erased from all but the most classified military records. The ground crew chief approached her aircraft with equipment that Morrison didn't recognize, specialized tools designed for maintaining systems that weren't supposed to exist in operational form. Their efficiency suggested this wasn't their first encounter with the X-47 Shadowhawk, raising uncomfortable questions about how long Unit 17 had continued operating after its supposed termination. "Captain Petrov, welcome back to the world of acknowledged operations," called a voice from across the tarmac. Morrison turned to see a woman in colonel's insignia approaching with a small entourage of personnel whose casual clothes couldn't quite disguise their military bearing. The woman's posture and confident stride marked her as someone accustomed to command responsibilities that extended far beyond normal Air Force operations. Petrov straightened to attention, her response carrying the automatic precision of someone whose military training had been refined through years of exposure to situations where small mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. "Colonel Harrison, I assume. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time." The exchange carried undercurrents of history and shared knowledge that excluded the conventional military personnel observing from the periphery of the discussion. Morrison found himself studying both women, trying to understand the relationship between a colonel who managed classified operations and a captain who had supposedly died 7 years earlier, but was clearly very much alive. "Captain, we need to discuss the circumstances that led to your decision to break operational security," Harrison replied, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who understood that the wrong words could compromise operations that extended far beyond the current situation. "Your actions have created complications that will require careful management." Petrov nodded grimly, her expression suggesting she understood the full implications of her choice to reveal Unit 17's continued existence. "Colonel, the complications created by my actions are considerably less significant than the complications that will result from maintaining operational security in the face of current threat developments." The cryptic exchange left Morrison with more questions than answers, but he was beginning to understand that he'd stumbled into the middle of a situation that involved national security considerations far beyond his current clearance level. The classified world of military aviation apparently included capabilities and operations that existed entirely outside the normal structure of Air Force operations. Kane's voice cut through his analysis as she approached his aircraft on foot, having completed her own post-flight procedures. "Blake, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore." Morrison could only nod in agreement as security personnel began establishing the perimeter that would isolate all participants in the morning's events from contact with anyone lacking the appropriate clearances to handle Unit 17 information. The debriefing facility, buried beneath the Nevada desert, contained conference rooms that looked more like movie sets than military installations. Their sophisticated electronic systems and comfortable furnishings, designed to create an environment where extraordinary revelations could be processed without the institutional atmosphere that characterized most classified briefings. Morrison found himself seated at a polished conference table, facing people whose job titles couldn't be mentioned in unclassified settings. Colonel Harrison opened the session with a directness that Morrison appreciated, cutting through the diplomatic language that usually characterized high-level military briefings. Gentlemen, what you witnessed this morning was the return of Captain Zara Petrov, officially killed in action 7 years ago, but actually reassigned to Unit 17 for continued operations in advanced aircraft development and testing. The statement landed like a physical blow, confirming suspicions that Morrison had been trying to suppress, since first seeing the X-47 Shadowhawk perform maneuvers that shouldn't be possible with current technology. The implications were staggering. If Unit 17 had continued operating after its supposed termination, it meant the Air Force possessed capabilities that existed entirely outside public knowledge or congressional oversight. "Sir, what exactly is Unit 17?" Morrison asked, though he suspected the answer would challenge his fundamental assumptions about military aviation. One of the civilians at the table leaned forward, his expression carrying the weight of someone who had spent years managing information that could reshape global military balance if it were revealed inappropriately. Unit 17 was established to develop and test aviation technologies that were too advanced or too sensitive for conventional development programs. Its pilots were selected from the most exceptional aviators in the Air Force and given access to aircraft and capabilities that officially don't exist. Kane's voice carried a note of professional excitement mixed with growing unease. "Are you telling us that Captain Petrov has been flying experimental aircraft for 7 years, while the rest of us thought she was dead?" Harrison nodded grimly. "Captain Petrov has been serving as Unit 17's primary test pilot, evaluating aircraft and systems that represent technological advances decades ahead of anything in current operational service. Her work has been essential to maintaining American air superiority against emerging threats." The revelation explained the exceptional flight characteristics Morrison had observed during the interception, but it raised darker questions about the nature of the threats that required such advanced capabilities to be developed in complete secrecy. If Unit 17 was real, and if it had been operating for 7 years beyond its official termination, then the United States was facing challenges that couldn't be addressed through conventional military capabilities. Morrison absorbed the implications while studying the faces around the conference table, understanding that he was receiving information that would fundamentally change his role within the Air Force. The comfortable world of conventional fighter operations was giving way to something considerably more complex and dangerous. "What kind of threats require capabilities that advanced?" he asked, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to hear the answer. Harrison exchanged glances with the civilian officials before responding with carefully measured words. "The kind of threats that would make this morning's demonstration look like a training exercise." Captain Petrov entered the secure briefing room with the controlled movements of someone who had spent years operating in environments where situational awareness could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her presence immediately shifted the dynamics of the discussion, bringing the abstract concepts of classified aviation programs into sharp focus through the reality of someone who had lived those programs from the inside. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the dramatic nature of this morning's revelation," she began, her voice carrying traces of an accent that spoke to origins in Eastern Europe, but training that was unmistakably American military. "Unfortunately, recent intelligence developments have made it necessary to begin transitioning certain Unit 17 capabilities from deep classification to operational readiness." Morrison studied Petrov's face, nodding the lines around her eyes that spoke to years of high-stress operations, and the kind of precision in her movements that came from flying aircraft where small mistakes could be fatal. She was younger than he'd expected, probably in her early 30s, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had mastered capabilities that few people in the world even knew existed. Kane leaned forward in her chair, professional curiosity overriding the surreal nature of the situation. "Captain, what kind of intelligence developments would justify exposing a program that's been classified for over 2 decades?" Petrov's expression darkened as she considered how much information could be shared without compromising operational security that extended far beyond the current discussion. The short version is that several potential adversaries have been developing capabilities that would render our current air defense systems inadequate. Unit 17's mission has evolved from technology development to preparing countermeasures against threats that don't officially exist yet. The cryptic explanation raised more questions than it answered, but Morrison was beginning to understand that they were being introduced to a world where conventional military doctrine was inadequate for addressing emerging challenges. The comfortable certainties of American air superiority were apparently built on foundations that were less solid than public statements suggested. Harrison cut through the growing tension with administrative efficiency. "Captain Petrov, please brief our guests on the current operational requirements that led to your decision to break cover." Petrov activated a holographic display system that materialized above the conference table, showing aircraft configurations and performance parameters that made Morrison's F-22 look like a museum piece. The technology represented in the display was decades ahead of anything he'd encountered in conventional military service, suggesting that Unit 17 had access to research and development capabilities that existed entirely outside normal Air Force channels. "These are the aircraft configurations that several potential adversaries are expected to deploy within the next 18 to 24 months, Petrov explained, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing technical specifications rather than revelations that could reshape global military balance. Morrison felt his understanding of current geopolitical stability crumble as he studied the holographic displays. The aircraft shown possessed capabilities that would make current American fighters obsolete overnight, rendering decades of military planning and billions of dollars in defense spending effectively worthless against opponents who had apparently been developing technologies that the United States had assumed were years away from practical deployment. Kane's voice cut through his mounting anxiety with professional focus. "Captain, what capabilities does Unit 17 possess to counter these developments?" Petrov's smile carried a mixture of pride and grim determination that suggested the answer would be both reassuring and terrifying. "Considerably more than anyone outside our program would believe possible." The holographic display shifted to show the X-47 Shadowhawk in technical detail, its specifications revealing capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what Morrison had thought was physically possible with current technology. The aircraft's performance parameters exceeded anything in operational service by margins that suggested fundamental advances in propulsion, materials science, and aerodynamic design. The Shadowhawk represents 7 years of development work conducted entirely outside conventional acquisition channels, Petrov explained, her voice carrying the pride of someone who had participated in creating something extraordinary. Its capabilities include sustained flight at altitudes and speeds that current air defense systems aren't designed to counter, along with stealth characteristics that make it effectively invisible to most radar systems. Morrison studied the technical specifications with growing amazement and unease. The aircraft's performance envelope was so far beyond current fighters that it seemed to belong to a different era of aviation entirely. More troubling was the realization that if the United States possessed such capabilities, other nations might have developed similar technologies through their own classified programs. "How many of these aircraft exist?" Kane asked, her tactical mind immediately focusing on the operational implications of advanced technology. The question touched on classification levels that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Harrison intervened before Petrov could respond with information that might compromise operational security. That information is compartmentalized at levels that exceed current clearances. What I can tell you is that Unit 17 has sufficient assets to conduct initial operations, while additional capabilities are brought online. The diplomatic phrasing couldn't disguise the underlying message. Unit 17 possessed multiple advanced aircraft and the infrastructure to support complex operations that would be conducted entirely outside normal military channels. The implications were both reassuring and deeply unsettling, suggesting that American military capabilities were far more advanced than public statements indicated, while raising questions about oversight and accountability for programs that operated in complete secrecy. Morrison found himself wondering how many other capabilities existed in the classified margins of military operations, hidden from congressional oversight and public awareness by classification systems that made asking questions about them a career-ending mistake. The comfortable assumptions of democratic oversight and military transparency were giving way to a darker understanding of how national security was actually managed in an era of rapidly evolving threats. Petrov's expression grew more serious as she prepared to address the question that had been implicit in every part of the discussion. The reason I chose to break operational security this morning is that intelligence indicates several potential adversaries are preparing to deploy advanced aircraft in operational scenarios that would test our defensive capabilities. Unit 17's mission has evolved from technology development to active preparation for scenarios that could develop very quickly. The implications of active preparation sent a chill through Morrison's understanding of current geopolitical stability. If Unit 17 was moving from development to operational readiness, it suggested that conflicts involving advanced military technologies were considered not just possible but probable within timeframes that made immediate preparation necessary. Harrison's voice carried the weight of command decisions that extended far beyond normal military operations. Gentlemen, you're being briefed on these capabilities because your squadron has been selected to provide conventional support for Unit 17 operations that may be required in the near future. Your role will be to maintain operational security while providing tactical support that integrates with capabilities you're not cleared to know about. The assignment was both an honor and a burden, offering access to the most advanced military aviation program in American history, while imposing responsibilities that would reshape their careers in ways they couldn't fully understand. Morrison realized that his routine interception mission had evolved into recruitment for operations that existed at the very edge of what was technically and legally possible within the American military system. Kane's voice reflected the mixed emotions that Morrison was experiencing. "Colonel, are we talking about training exercises or actual operational deployment?" The pause that followed her question lasted long enough to make everyone in the room uncomfortable. When Harrison finally responded, her words carried implications that would haunt Morrison's dreams for months to come. That depends on decisions that are being made at levels of government that don't officially exist. The secure communications center beneath the Nevada facility buzzed with activity that spoke to operations extending far beyond the morning's aircraft interception, with personnel monitoring global intelligence feeds and coordinating with agencies whose names appeared on no public organizational charts. Morrison and Kane found themselves escorted through corridors lined with equipment that looked more like science fiction than military hardware. The integration between Unit 17 and conventional Air Force operations has been planned for several years, Colonel Harrison explained, as they walked past workstations where analysts were processing intelligence that would never appear in public briefings. Your squadron was selected because of exceptional performance records and security clearances that made you suitable for exposure to advanced capabilities. The revelation that their selection wasn't random added another layer of complexity to an already surreal situation. Morrison realized that their careers had been tracked and evaluated by people who operated entirely outside the normal Air Force command structure, assessed for suitability to participate in operations that officially didn't exist. Captain Petrov joined them at an observation window that looked out over a hangar containing aircraft that challenged every assumption Morrison had about current military aviation capabilities. Besides the X-47 Shadowhawk, he could see at least 3 other aircraft configurations that didn't match anything in his extensive knowledge of fighter designs, their sleek profiles suggesting technologies that were years ahead of anything in operational service. Those aircraft represent different approaches to the same fundamental challenge, Petrov explained, nodding Morrison's fascination with the advanced designs. How do you maintain air superiority when potential adversaries have developed capabilities that render current fighters obsolete? Kane's voice carried professional excitement mixed with growing unease about the implications of what they were witnessing. Captain, those aircraft look like they belong to a different century of aviation technology. Petrov's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had spent years pushing the boundaries of what was technically possible. In many ways, they do. Unit 17's mission has been to compress decades of normal development timelines into programs that could provide operational capabilities when conventional approaches would be inadequate. The efficiency of the compressed development timeline raised questions about funding sources and oversight mechanisms that made Morrison uncomfortable. Programs that operated outside normal acquisition channels typically involved decision-making processes that bypassed the congressional oversight and public accountability that were supposed to govern military spending. Harrison seemed to read his concerns in his expression. Major Morrison, I understand that exposure to these capabilities raises questions about oversight and accountability. What I can tell you is that Unit 17 operates under special authorization that provides oversight through channels that are appropriate for programs of this classification level. The diplomatic language couldn't disguise the fact that Unit 17 operated under authorities that existed outside normal military command structures, answerable to people whose identities and responsibilities were themselves classified at levels that made conventional oversight impossible. Morrison was beginning to understand that national security in the 21st century involved programs that challenged fundamental assumptions about democratic government and military accountability. As they continued their tour of facilities that officially didn't exist, Morrison reflected on the irony that his morning interception of an unidentified aircraft had led to revelations that would reshape his understanding of American military capabilities and the hidden structures that governed national defense in an era of rapidly evolving threats. The technical briefing session revealed capabilities that challenged Morrison's fundamental understanding of the laws of physics, with performance parameters that seemed to belong to the realm of theoretical speculation rather than operational aircraft systems. The X-47 Shadowhawk specifications included sustained flight at altitudes above 90,000 feet, speeds that exceeded Mach 4 in level flight, and stealth characteristics that made it effectively invisible to radar systems designed to track conventional aircraft. The propulsion system incorporates advances in scramjet technology that have been under development for over 15 years, Petrov explained, using a laser pointer to highlight technical diagrams that looked more like artistic concepts than engineering blueprints. Combined with advanced materials that can withstand the thermal stresses of hypersonic flight, the Shadowhawk can operate in flight regimes that are inaccessible to conventional fighters. Morrison studied the technical specifications while trying to reconcile them with his knowledge of current aviation technology. The advances represented in the Shadowhawk's design suggested breakthroughs in multiple scientific disciplines, achievements that would normally require decades of research and development conducted by thousands of engineers and scientists. Kane leaned forward in her chair, her tactical mind immediately focusing on operational implications. "Captain, what kind of mission profiles do these capabilities support?" The question touched on operational planning that extended far beyond conventional Air Force doctrine, involving scenarios that had been developed by strategists who understood that future conflicts would be fought with technologies that didn't officially exist. Petrov's expression grew more serious as she prepared to address capabilities that would reshape military aviation. The Shadowhawk's performance envelope allows it to conduct reconnaissance and strike missions against targets that are protected by the most advanced air defense systems currently deployed, she explained, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing technical capabilities rather than revolutionary military systems. Its operational range exceeds 8,000 miles without refueling, and its payload capacity allows it to carry weapons systems that are themselves classified at levels beyond current discussion. The mention of classified weapons systems added another dimension to Morrison's growing understanding of Unit 17's capabilities. If the aircraft represented advances decades ahead of conventional technology, the weapons they carried might be even more advanced, incorporating technologies that could reshape the fundamental nature of aerial warfare. Harrison interrupted the technical discussion with administrative reality. "Gentlemen, your exposure to these capabilities comes with responsibilities that will define the remainder of your Air Force careers. You will be required to maintain operational security at levels that exceed anything in your previous experience, while preparing to support operations that may be activated with very short notice." The assignment represented both an extraordinary opportunity and a burden that would isolate them from colleagues who lacked the clearances necessary to understand their new responsibilities. Morrison realized that his career had just taken a turn that would separate him permanently from the conventional Air Force community that had defined his professional identity for over 2 decades. As the briefing continued with revelations that challenged everything he thought he knew about military aviation, Morrison found himself wondering whether the capabilities he was learning about would be sufficient to address the threats that had prompted Unit 17's transition from development to operational readiness. The flight simulation facility contained equipment that Morrison didn't recognize, holographic displays and motion systems that created training environments more realistic than anything he'd encountered in conventional Air Force facilities. The simulator designed for the X-47 Shadowhawk looked more like a spacecraft control center than an aircraft cockpit, its advanced interfaces suggesting that piloting the experimental fighter required skills that went far beyond conventional flight training. "The Shadowhawk's flight characteristics are unlike anything you've experienced in conventional aircraft," Petrov explained as she guided Morrison and Kane through the simulator systems. "The combination of hypersonic capability and advanced maneuvering systems requires pilot techniques that have been developed specifically for this aircraft configuration." Morrison settled into the simulator's pilot seat, immediately noticing that the control interfaces bore little resemblance to the systems in his F-22. The displays were entirely electronic, presenting flight information through augmented reality systems that overlaid tactical data directly onto the pilot's field of vision through helmet-mounted displays that looked like they belonged in science fiction movies. "The learning curve is steep," Kane observed as she examined the flight controls, noting the absence of traditional mechanical systems in favor of electronic interfaces that responded to pilot inputs through systems that seemed to read intentions as much as physical movements. "How long does it take to become proficient in this aircraft?" Petrov's expression carried memories of training programs that had pushed both technology and human performance to their absolute limits. Unit 17's pilot training program is considerably more intensive than conventional flight school. The combination of advanced aircraft systems and operational requirements that exceed normal parameters requires preparation that goes beyond traditional aviation education. The diplomatic phrasing couldn't disguise the fact that Unit 17's pilots underwent training programs that existed entirely outside normal Air Force education systems, learning skills and techniques that couldn't be discussed in unclassified settings. Morrison was beginning to understand that becoming a Unit 17 pilot meant entering a world where conventional military careers were left behind in favor of capabilities that redefined what it meant to be a military aviator. Harrison joined them in the simulator facility, her presence adding official weight to what had been an informal exploration of advanced technology. Major Morrison, Lieutenant Colonel Kane, your participation in Unit 17 operations will begin with familiarization training that introduces you to aircraft capabilities and operational procedures that aren't covered in conventional pilot education. The assignment represented a fundamental change in their military careers, offering access to the most advanced aviation technology in the world while imposing responsibilities that would separate them from the conventional Air Force community they'd known throughout their professional lives. Morrison realized that accepting the assignment meant embracing a level of classification and operational security that would reshape every aspect of his identity as a military officer. As Petrov began demonstrating the Shadowhawk's flight simulation systems, Morrison found himself experiencing a mixture of excitement and apprehension about capabilities that exceeded everything he'd imagined was possible with current technology. The aircraft's performance parameters suggested that piloting it would be less like flying a conventional fighter and more like controlling a vehicle that existed at the intersection of aviation and spaceflight. The question that haunted him as he began learning the Shadowhawk systems was whether these extraordinary capabilities would be sufficient to address whatever threats had prompted Unit 17's emergence from the classified shadows of military aviation. The Classified Operations Center revealed the true scope of Unit 17's mission through displays that monitored global intelligence feeds and tracked potential threats that existed entirely outside public awareness. Morrison found himself studying satellite imagery and reconnaissance reports that painted a picture of international military development that was far more advanced and dangerous than anything reflected in public discussions of national security. The intelligence picture that drove Unit 17's transition to operational status involves multiple potential adversaries who have been developing advanced military aviation capabilities through their own classified programs. Colonel Harrison explained, gesturing toward displays that showed aircraft configurations and performance parameters that rivaled or exceeded American capabilities. Our assessment indicates that several nations possess technology that could challenge American air superiority within the next 12 to 18 months. The revelation that America's air superiority was under threat from multiple sources simultaneously created a strategic picture that was far more complex and dangerous than conventional military planning assumed. Morrison studied intelligence reports that suggested China, Russia, and potentially other nations had been conducting their own crash programs to develop hypersonic aircraft and advanced stealth technologies. Kane's voice reflected the growing unease that Morrison was experiencing as the full scope of the threat picture became clear. Colonel, are these capabilities being developed independently, or is there evidence of coordination between potential adversaries? The question touched on intelligence assessments that extended far beyond conventional military analysis, involving counterintelligence operations that tracked technology transfer and collaborative development programs that operated entirely outside normal diplomatic channels. Harrison's expression suggested that the answer was both more complex and more troubling than straightforward competition between national programs. Intelligence indicates that some advanced aviation technologies have been shared between potential adversaries through channels that suggest coordination in developing capabilities specifically designed to counter American air superiority, she replied, her careful phrasing indicating that the full intelligence picture was classified at levels beyond their current briefing. Captain Petrov joined the discussion with operational perspective that came from years of testing capabilities designed to counter exactly the kind of threats they were discussing. The aircraft configurations being developed by potential adversaries represent fundamental challenges to conventional air defense doctrine. Their capabilities are designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in systems that were developed to counter previous generations of fighter aircraft. The strategic implications were staggering. If multiple potential adversaries were coordinating development of advanced aviation technologies, the United States faced a situation where decades of military superiority could be negated simultaneously by opponents who had learned to combine their technological capabilities against American weaknesses. Morrison absorbed the intelligence briefings, while understanding that Unit 17's mission extended far beyond technology development into preparation for conflicts that could reshape global military balance. The comfortable assumptions of American technological superiority were giving way to more complex reality, where maintaining military advantage required capabilities that existed entirely outside public knowledge or conventional military doctrine. As the briefing continued with revelations about threat capabilities and response options, Morrison realized that his introduction to Unit 17 was preparation for operations that could determine whether American military dominance would survive the 21st century's rapidly evolving technological landscape. The secure communication session connected Unit 17's command structure with officials whose identities were classified at levels that made their participation in the briefing both essential and officially deniable. Morrison found himself listening to voices that carried the authority of highest-level government decision-making, while belonging to people who couldn't be acknowledged to exist in their current capacities. Unit 17's transition to operational readiness has been authorized under national security decision, directive classifications, that provide emergency authorities for addressing threats that exceed conventional military response capabilities. Came a voice through encrypted communication systems that scrambled both audio and video to prevent identification of the speaker. Current intelligence assessments indicate that operational deployment may be required within timeframes that make immediate preparation essential. The authorization represented the highest levels of military and governmental approval for operations that would be conducted entirely outside normal command structures and congressional oversight. Morrison was beginning to understand that Unit 17's emergence from deep classification reflected decision-making processes that existed at the intersection of military necessity and political realities that couldn't be addressed through conventional democratic institutions. Colonel Harrison responded with the professional efficiency of someone who had spent years managing programs that operated in the gray areas between official acknowledgement and necessary denial. Understood. Unit 17 assets are prepared for immediate deployment pending final operational parameters and target selection. The exchange confirmed that Unit 17 wasn't just a research and development program, but an active military capability that could be deployed against real targets in actual conflicts. Morrison felt the weight of that realization as he understood that his recruitment into the program meant potential participation in operations that could have global strategic implications. Captain Petrov's expression reflected years of preparation for exactly this kind of transition from development to operational readiness. Her presence in the briefing represented the culmination of classified training programs that had prepared her to pilot advanced aircraft in scenarios that conventional military doctrine couldn't address. Kane leaned forward in her chair, her tactical mind focusing on the operational implications of what they were hearing. "Sir, what kind of operational timeline are we looking at for potential deployment?" The question touched on operational planning that involved intelligence assessments and strategic decision-making at the highest levels of government. The pause before the encrypted voice responded suggested that even discussing timelines involved revealing information that carried enormous security implications. Current assessments indicate that Unit 17 capabilities may be required to address developing situations within 30 to 60 days, came the response, the careful phrasing indicating that specific operational planning was already underway for scenarios that hadn't been discussed in the current briefing. Personnel assignments and training schedules should be adjusted to accommodate immediate readiness requirements. Morrison absorbed the implications of immediate readiness requirements, while understanding that his career had just taken a turn that would define not just his professional future, but potentially his role in conflicts that could reshape global military balance. The routine interception mission that had started his day had evolved into recruitment for operations that existed at the very edge of what was legally and strategically possible within the American military system. As the secure communications session concluded with operational directives that would reshape Unit 17's mission profile, Morrison reflected on the irony that learning about America's most advanced military capabilities had also revealed how vulnerable those capabilities were to threats that were developing faster than conventional strategic planning could address. The advanced training program began immediately, with Morrison and Kane being introduced to flight systems and operational procedures that existed decades beyond their previous experience in conventional Air Force operations. The learning curve was steep, demanding mastery of technologies that seemed to blend aviation with concepts from aerospace engineering and theoretical physics. The Shadowhawk's hypersonic flight regime requires pilot techniques that go beyond conventional aircraft handling, Petrov explained during their first training session in the advanced simulator systems. At Mach 4+, traditional control inputs become inadequate, and the pilot must learn to work with flight management systems that make decisions faster than human reaction time allows. Morrison found himself struggling with control interfaces that responded to intentions as much as physical inputs, electronic systems that seemed to anticipate pilot requirements and adjust aircraft behavior accordingly. The technology was simultaneously impressive and unsettling, representing advances that made the pilot as much a passenger as a controller of the aircraft's capabilities. Kane adapted more quickly to the advanced systems, her natural flying instincts translating effectively to the Shadowhawk's unconventional flight characteristics. "Captain, these systems feel like they're designed to expand pilot capabilities rather than replace them," she observed during a particularly complex training scenario. "The aircraft seems to enhance human decision-making rather than override it." The observation touched on design philosophies that had guided Unit 17's approach to developing advanced aviation technologies. Rather than creating autonomous systems that eliminated human pilots, the program had focused on technologies that amplified human capabilities while maintaining the kind of tactical flexibility that only human judgment could provide. Harrison joined them for the afternoon training session, her presence indicating that their progress was being monitored at levels that went beyond normal pilot training programs. "Your adaptation to advanced systems has been exceptional," she noted, reviewing performance data that tracked their learning curves through metrics that Morrison didn't fully understand. "The integration between conventional pilot skills and advanced aircraft capabilities is proceeding ahead of projected timelines." The acceleration of their training schedule reflected the operational urgency that had driven Unit 17's emergence from deep classification. Morrison realized that they were being prepared for actual missions rather than extended training programs, with timelines that suggested deployment could come much sooner than normal military procedures would allow. As the training day concluded with simulated missions that tested their ability to operate advanced aircraft in scenarios that conventional doctrine couldn't address, Morrison found himself both excited by the extraordinary capabilities he was learning to master and apprehensive about the real-world situations that would require those capabilities to be employed in actual combat operations. The question that haunted his thoughts as he left the training facility was whether the advanced technologies and intensive preparation would be sufficient to address threats that had prompted the most classified military program in American history to emerge from the shadows and prepare for operations that could determine the future of global military balance. The intelligence briefing that followed their initial training session revealed threat scenarios that were far more immediate and complex than Morrison had anticipated, with satellite imagery and intercepted communications painting a picture of international military development that suggested potential conflicts could develop within weeks rather than months or years. Recent intelligence indicates that at least two potential adversaries are approaching operational deployment of advanced aircraft systems that could challenge American air superiority in specific regional scenarios, Colonel Harrison explained, using secure displays to show aircraft configurations and performance parameters that rivaled Unit 17's capabilities. The timeline for potential deployment of these systems has accelerated significantly over the past 60 days. The revelation that America's technological advantages were eroding in real time created a sense of urgency that transformed Unit 17's mission from long-term preparation to immediate operational readiness. Morrison studied intelligence reports that suggested China and Russia had both achieved breakthroughs in hypersonic aircraft development that could render conventional American air defenses inadequate. Captain Petrov's analysis carried the weight of someone who had spent years testing capabilities, designed specifically to counter the kinds of threats they were now facing in operational reality. The aircraft being developed by potential adversaries incorporate technologies that were supposed to be theoretical rather than practical, she noted, her voice reflecting professional respect for opponents who had apparently achieved remarkable technological advances. Their capabilities suggest access to research breakthroughs that parallel or exceed our own development timelines. The possibility that potential adversaries had achieved technological parity or superiority in advanced aviation systems created strategic implications that extended far beyond conventional military planning. If American air superiority could be challenged or negated by opponents with comparable technologies, the fundamental assumptions underlying decades of defense strategy would require immediate reassessment. Kane studied the intelligence displays with tactical awareness that focused on operational implications rather than strategic concerns. Colonel, how do our capabilities compare to these potential threat systems? The question touched on operational assessments that involved comparing classified capabilities with intelligence estimates about opponent technologies that were themselves highly classified. Harrison's response carried the careful precision of someone who understood that even discussing comparative capabilities involved revealing information that could compromise national security if disclosed inappropriately. Unit 17's assets possess capabilities that provide tactical advantages in specific operational scenarios, she replied, her diplomatic phrasing indicating that direct comparisons involved classifications beyond their current briefing level. However, the margin of superiority is smaller than previous assessments assumed, and operational success will depend on factors that go beyond pure technological capability. The acknowledgement that technological superiority alone wouldn't guarantee operational success added human factors and tactical considerations to an already complex strategic picture. Morrison realized that Unit 17's advanced capabilities would need to be employed with exceptional skill and precision to maintain advantages over opponents who possessed comparable technologies and potentially superior numbers. As the intelligence briefing concluded with operational scenarios that could require Unit 17 deployment within the immediate future, Morrison understood that his introduction to the program's capabilities was preparation for missions that would test not just advanced technology, but the limits of human skill and courage in conflicts that could determine the future of American military dominance. The operational planning session revealed mission profiles that challenged everything Morrison thought he understood about modern aerial warfare, with scenarios that involved penetrating the most advanced air defense systems in the world to conduct strikes against targets that could reshape global military balance. The complexity of the proposed operations required capabilities that existed at the very edge of what was technically possible with current technology. The primary mission profile involves deep penetration reconnaissance and selective strike operations against high-value targets that are protected by integrated air defense systems, specifically designed to counter American aircraft. Colonel Harrison explained, using holographic displays to show tactical scenarios that looked more like military science fiction than conventional operational planning. Morrison studied the mission parameters while trying to understand how the Shadowhawk's advanced capabilities would be employed in real combat situations. The operational requirements exceeded anything in his extensive experience with conventional fighters, involving flight profiles and tactical procedures that seemed to push both aircraft and pilot capabilities to their absolute limits. Captain Petrov's operational experience provided context that made the extraordinary mission requirements seem more achievable, though no less dangerous. The Shadowhawk's performance envelope allows it to approach heavily defended targets through flight regimes that existing air defense systems aren't designed to counter, she explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had tested these capabilities under controlled conditions. However, operational success requires precision execution that leaves no margin for error. The emphasis on precision execution reflected the reality that Unit 17's advanced capabilities came with operational requirements that demanded exceptional pilot skill and tactical awareness. Mistakes that might be survivable in conventional fighters could be catastrophic when operating at the performance levels required for missions against the most sophisticated opponents in the world. Kane's tactical analysis focused on the human factors that would determine mission success, regardless of technological advantages. Captain, what kind of pilot workload do these mission profiles create? Are we talking about sustainable operational tempo or maximum effort missions? The question touched on operational realities that went beyond technological capabilities to address the human limitations that ultimately determined what was possible in combat situations. Petrov's response reflected years of experience operating at the limits of both human and machine capability. The cognitive workload during high-threat penetration missions is intense enough that sustained operations would be limited to the most experienced pilots, she admitted, her candor reflecting the operational honesty that characterized discussions within Unit 17. These are maximum effort missions that require exceptional preparation and recovery time between operations. Morrison absorbed the operational realities, while understanding that Unit 17's capabilities came with human costs that went beyond the obvious dangers of flying experimental aircraft in combat situations. The psychological and physical demands of operating at the very edge of human capability would limit the number of pilots who could effectively employ the program's advanced technologies. As the operational planning session concluded with mission assignments that could be activated within days, Morrison realized that his recruitment into Unit 17 meant preparation for combat operations that would test not just advanced technology, but the limits of human performance in scenarios that could determine the future of global military balance. The final briefing session addressed the broader strategic context that had driven Unit 17's emergence from deep classification, revealing a complex international situation where multiple potential adversaries were coordinating efforts to challenge American military dominance through technological capabilities that had been developed in complete secrecy over many years. The current international security environment represents a convergence of threats that conventional military doctrine wasn't designed to address, explained a senior intelligence official whose identity remained classified even within the secure briefing facility. Multiple potential adversaries have achieved technological capabilities that, when combined, could neutralize American military advantages that have been assumed to be permanent features of the strategic landscape. The revelation that America's military dominance was under coordinated challenge from multiple opponents simultaneously created a strategic picture that was far more complex and dangerous than public discussions of international security suggested. Morrison found himself studying intelligence assessments that painted a picture of technological competition that had been conducted entirely outside public awareness. Colonel Harrison's analysis provided operational context for the strategic threats they were discussing. Unit 17's capabilities were developed specifically to address scenarios where conventional military responses would be inadequate, she explained, her voice carrying the weight of years spent managing programs that operated at the intersection of technological possibility and strategic necessity. The current international situation represents exactly the kind of challenge that justified the program's creation. Captain Petrov's operational perspective reflected years of preparation for conflicts that most people assumed belonged to theoretical speculation rather than practical military planning. The opponents we're preparing to face have spent decades developing technologies specifically designed to counter American military advantages, she noted, her professional assessment reflecting respect for adversaries who had achieved remarkable technological capabilities through sustained effort and coordination. The acknowledgement that potential adversaries had developed advanced capabilities through coordinated effort raised questions about intelligence failures and strategic planning that had apparently underestimated the scope and effectiveness of opponent research programs. Morrison was beginning to understand that Unit 17's emergence represented both a response to immediate threats and an acknowledgement that American strategic assumptions required fundamental reassessment. Kane's question reflected concerns that went beyond immediate operational requirements to address the broader implications of the strategic situation they were facing. Sir, are we looking at a technological arms race or preparation for actual conflicts that could develop in the near term? The pause that followed her question lasted long enough to make everyone in the briefing room uncomfortable. When the intelligence official finally responded, his words carried implications that would reshape their understanding of the international security environment they were preparing to operate within. Intelligence assessments indicate that the current situation represents preparation for conflicts that several potential adversaries believe are inevitable within the next 12 to 24 months. Unit 17's mission is to ensure that American military capabilities remain adequate to address challenges that conventional planning assumed were decades away from practical deployment. Morrison absorbed the implications of inevitable conflicts, while understanding that his recruitment into Unit 17 meant preparation for wars that would be fought with technologies that existed entirely outside public knowledge or conventional military doctrine. The weight of that responsibility settled over him like the desert sun, intense and inescapable, as he realized that the routine interception mission that had started his day had evolved into preparation for conflicts that could determine the future of global military balance, and potentially the survival of American democracy in a world where technological advantages could no longer be assumed to be permanent. As the briefings concluded and the full scope of Unit 17's mission became clear, Morrison found himself standing at the edge of a classified world where the most advanced military technologies in human history were being prepared for deployment in conflicts that would test not just machines and tactics, but the fundamental principles that had guided American military doctrine for decades. The future stretched ahead like the Nevada desert itself, vast, unforgiving, and full of challenges that would demand everything that exceptional pilots and extraordinary machines could provide in defense of a nation whose citizens would never know how close they had come to losing advantages that had seemed as permanent as the mountains that surrounded the secret airfield, where America's most classified warriors prepared for battles that officially would never happen.